Well, our initial involvement, we would have liked it to have been even earlier, in 2005, when we put a team together to prepare the original master plan for the Olympic Park. Sadly, that wasn't to be, and so we thought we'd missed our opportunity. And then toward the end of 2007, we received a notification, phone call initially, from the Olympic Delivery Authority. Would we be interested in putting a proposal together for the landscape design and delivery of the North or South Park part of the Games? And so we had a very, very small window in which to put our team together, which originally had over 20 sub-consultants as part of our team. We had international landscape architect, Hargraves Associates, I'm sure you know, as part of our team, part of our sub-consultancy advice, and their experience at Sydney came to the fore in that respect. We had, for lighting, we brought in Sutton Vane Associates. For ecology, LDA Design Ecology. Irrigation, waterways. For specialist horticultural advice, we used Sheffield University, James Hitzmore and Nigel Dunnett. And for garden design, for the elements of that in 2012, gardens, we brought Sarah Price into our team. And there were one or two others also part of that team, but they were the key players. Yes, we were unique, I think, actually, amongst all of the consultants who were appointed on the project. Most, if not all others, were appointed through the NEC 3 form of contract. We were not. We were appointed through the HCA, Homes and Communities Agency contract, which had been formerly the English Partnerships contract, which was, it gave rise to an interesting situation as landscape architects, because in fact we were not party to the NEC 3 contract, which actually meant that when the designs were being implemented on the park, LDA Design did not have a voice in the contract, which was a very interesting situation to be in, seeing your designs being implemented by others. In time, with the client, we were able to evolve a way forwards whereby we could provide advice and overview to do with the particular detailing, and then make comments on that, and that was then fed back into the contract. I think the logic, the intent of the original contract was a good one, in that our role was look and feel and development of the master plan, and then the delivery of all of the soft works on the park. But the hard landscape work was, again, initial work was the look and feel of our team, and then the delivery of that was done through two landscape engineering teams, one from Arup and one from Atkins. And that's something that's actually quite an often used system on the continent, Germany and Holland for instance, where the landscape engineer is a recognised profession. In the UK, much less so. So I think the client was trying to ensure, that's not to say that the landscape architects can't work through hard detailing, which of course we all can, but the expertise in some of the engineering works on the park are very much in favour of engineering consultancy, but with a landscape understanding. So they became the parties to the contract. And then there was a supervisor brought into the project, which the NEC 3 contract allows for, provides for. So our role as the lead design consultancy with our sub-consultant team was a full engagement through all of the soft works, as would a typical contract in landscape architecture, but the hard works was a separate issue. We were first appointed on a very tight programme. We were given essentially 6 weeks to develop the original master plan that had been prepared by EDOR as was and ACOM as they now are. And there were two drivers to that. One was that it was felt by the client that the North Park in particular was not strongly green or insufficient landscape feel to it. It was quite a hard engineered response originally because the concourses were quite wide. So one of the first things we did was to re-examine the capacity of the concourses, looking back at other games and try to understand what was really necessary and required in games, because of course we were designing a park for legacy from day one. So one of the real strong points from the client was we don't build something that we have to pull out later, which is absolutely right. So we believed that after remodelling the crowd numbering, we could reduce the size of the concourse. That immediately freed up area for more green space. And in doing that, we were able to pull back the landscape and reveal the river systems, the River Lee in particular, in the North Park. In fact, there are 3 water systems in and around the park. And these were largely uncelebrated in the original concept. So we were able to open up the rivers, the views of the rivers, to the public when they came into the games, and of course it would remain in legacy. So that exercise was a very rapid exercise, because in parallel, the park of course was merrily moving on. Utilities were being developed, pylons were being undergrounded, waterways were being cleaned, and of course we had a date that we could not be late for. Well, the waterways as we found them, obviously a highly despoiled and polluted site. The waterways in themselves were very, very poor from an ecological content, from a visual perspective. And one of the key objectives, again, and one of the drivers for us, was that we were being asked to ensure that we delivered 45 hectares of biodiverse landscape as part of the ultimate park solution. Not necessarily 45 hectares for games, although we're around about 40 hectares in games, but ultimately. The rivers form a really important part of that, not just for fish life and otters, but also for nesting birds and bird life. So there are a number of species in this part of East London that are either threatened with extinction or indeed no longer populate the area. And by replanting and cleaning up the water and putting in particular plant species, we would encourage particular species to recolonize. So as part of that, some 350,000 wetland plants were incorporated into the River Lee at that point. The river was widened and dredged and cleaned. We also incorporated fish refuges into those planting margins. And in fact, this was done through the water engineering team from Atkins, and we worked in collaboration with them to achieve the desired response. So the site was incredibly despoiled, and again, from a sustainability perspective, it was a requirement, if we could achieve that as much material remained on site as possible. To do that, there were 2 very large, what became known as soil hospitals, constructed on the site. And all of the material from the site, or most of the concrete material and polluted material, was put through these soil hospitals, superheated, which gave ultimately an inert product. And this product we could retain on site, and that largely forms the core of the large landforms in the park. In addition, some of the clean stone forms the batters to the permanent bridge systems. The gabion baskets that you'd see on the park, they're filled with material that came from the park in the first place. And in terms of the batters, by reducing those concourses, as I mentioned earlier, and regrading the slopes back from the river, we were able to create the riverine landscape and provide access down there for the public, which they would not have been able to engage with had it been the original and a much steeper profile that was being created. So instead of material coming off-site, it went up. I think because we came slightly late to the team, and I explained that there were projects already ongoing in terms of utilities and contamination clear-up, and we had a very small window in which to make our name, if you will, and our design work. One of the greatest challenges was understanding the scale of the site and the number of other dependencies on the site with whom we needed to work with. So there wasn't just our own consultant team, which, as I said to you, ultimately was around about 12, 14 consultancies that we were integrating with. We then had to integrate with utilities design teams, bridges design teams, and of course the client's requirements and his team, because there's effectively a very expert client who we were working with. So that they were huge challenges, and indeed the project management team, who we were working through, which was a company created for the purpose of the project, called CLM, which is 3 project management companies coming together. We worked through them in order to satisfy the client's needs. So we had an immense learning curve in a very short space of time, just to understand the geography and the culture. Once we were content with that, and the teams, they were content with us, and that we had, if you will, proven our worth, it was a much clearer and stronger, and that's the other point, that everyone needed to work to the same program. Otherwise it wouldn't have happened. And that's, I know that sounds obvious, but actually when everyone's starting from a different place, that was quite a challenge. We worked, as you can imagine, in a feverish way, very, very long hours and days and nights and weekends initially. And we'd agreed with the client to review design on a weekly basis. So we would work for a few days, and then we would invite the client into our offices in central London at the time. And we would have design reviews with representatives from the client team. And they would give us sign-off at various stages. They then were required to go to the next stage internally and have that sign-off also sanctioned, agreed by the government, essentially. And then that would come back to us. So the lag time was perhaps 2 or 3 days. It was quite quick to allow us to move on to the next stage. But essentially, we worked very, very closely with the client. So it was an open book, very open process. I think at the time it was the sigh of relief of knowing that we'd got there. In actual fact, we had delivered our responsibilities pretty much by the autumn of 2011. And the park has been in maintenance for almost 12 months, albeit with some changes that came upon us because of the low-cog requirements as the overlay team came into play. Some of the original designs we needed to look at again and tweak here and there to allow the festival, the Games Festival, to operate smoothly. So there was some of that work has been ongoing until the games have opened at the end of July. But largely, we'd delivered our commitment by then. So the achievement for us was delivering on time and indeed under budget, which was a huge achievement, with no issues with the client, a very happy client, which is always important, but that isn't always easy to achieve, and we have that. But I think actually, having had the opportunity to be on the park since it opened on 2 or 3 occasions, picking up on the comments of the visitor experience, it was quite clear that I think most of the public, whether they be UK or world visitors, had really not grasped the maturity of the public realm and parklands that we've achieved, or they didn't expect it. So we're getting comments that the landscape is just incredibly mature, it's beautiful, the meadows are fantastic. And we, in design terms, obviously knew in our hearts and our minds that was the vision that we wanted to deliver. But your best critic is your client and your public, and it's very heartening to know that we're getting that sort of response. There are quite a number. I mean, I've mentioned the sustainability aspect and recycling. So, for instance, take the planting mixes and matrices that we have evolved for the site. There are no natural soils on the site, so we have created essentially 7 man-made soil mixes for the different plant types and different plant communities. They're largely a free-draining mix. In some instances, we have added an element of topsoil, largely for the large tree plantings. Thereafter, it's a very little organic matter. And the choice of plant material has been important for us. Again, looking to the Biodiversity Action Plan, we wanted to select species that not only were appropriate to the site and this particular climate, but also species that, to the best of our understandings, will adapt to the changing climates that the UK is scheduled to undergo in the coming decades, or even century. So we're looking at material that will do better in cold and drier winters and warmer, wetter summers. And that's particularly important in the 2012 Gardens concept in the South Park, whereby we're looking at material that, yes, of course, comes from the various parts of the world that the British plant collector has visited, and that's the story to that. I'm sure we can talk more about that in due course. But it's also looking at materials that we believe will do very well in the UK, and that links us back to the park user and whether those plants can be obtained in garden centres and nurseries in the future. So it's a showcase for future planting as well. Well, we're appointed as designers for the landscape transformation of the park, which essentially will commence essentially the day after the Paralympics closes. There will be approximately 12 or so months when the park will be closed to the public, while the temporary venues are removed. For instance, hockey, water polo, and the seating areas, basketball and seating areas to aquatics are the key removable venues. In addition to that, some of the concourse will be further reduced to allow for additional landscape integration. For instance, where the hockey presently sits in games, that will be removed and be replaced by a new northwestern parkland. We're also designing what is generally considered to be a temporary landscape overlay before the legacy development is properly delivered. I think the London Games are quite unique in that most Olympic Park projects had a games mode and a legacy mode. And I think the two parks that have come closest to delivering in a full landscape and public realmway would be Munich back in 1972 and Barcelona. I think all of the Olympic Games sites have suffered for that lack of long-term legacy integration. But in London, we've introduced, or the client has introduced, a transformation stage, which is quite unique and original. And that is aimed at ensuring that the park progresses from a games festival into long-term legacy. But before those long-term legacy plots are developed, they will be screened, if you will, in part, or given a meanwhile landscape treatment, so that they look to the public and the park user like they are part of the park. So some of that is sacrificial, but no one quite knows how the legacy master plan will play out. Of course, there's a master plan and there's designs, and everyone would clearly wish it to play out in the way it's intended. But that's the one thing that you can't guess. And so the landscape has a really important role to play in as the glue that keeps the park together through all of that transitional time. And it also allows for areas to be programmed. So there are two hubs going to be built in the park: a North Park hub, which is being led by another landscape practice, land use consultants, and a South Park hub, which is led by James Corner, his practice in the States. And those two areas will form a full programmable festival and park response that you'd expect if you are coming to the park as someone living in the local community. There will be toilets, cafe, play areas, so on and so forth. If you're coming down to the park as a visitor to come and see where the Olympic Games were held, so more of an international visitor, if you like, in the South Park, that will become more of an urban entertainment complex, if you like. The South Bank in the centre of London, the intention is to recreate some of that. So all of that further landscape work, in summary, will create a park that is almost twice the size of the current Games Park. As part of our work, we, through the planning process, we were required to prepare a 10 years management and maintenance plan that has been fully approved and endorsed by the planning authorities and by the client, initially the ODA, now by the London Legacy Development Corporation. And the maintenance side of that for games is presently in the hands of the soft landscape contractors who were engaged in delivering the games product. That will cease, their role will cease at the end of October 2012. There will then be a short intermission, if you will, and then a whole new programme of maintenance and management will commence in November 2012 and will carry on through 2013-14, and the client has undertaken to carry on with that full maintenance programme. At the moment, the absolute dotting the I's and crossing of the T's is still, as I understand it, to be finally decided. But at the moment, all of the maintenance sits with the LLDC. What happens behind the scenes in terms of how that is set up financially, I'm not aware. But certainly from the outward-facing perspective, LLDC are the client and custodian for the park and all of the maintenance. One of the key changes, as well as creating more landscape, is that we'll be also creating, or recreating, I should say, the cycle circuit, the road cycle circuit, which will be attached to part of the cycling and velodrome facilities. That's a local facility for local club, local community. So the whole point of that is to put back what essentially was taken away or as part of the game's development. Equally, we are also constructing 2 areas of allotment gardens. Again, in the past, when the site was first decided upon, a number of allotments on the site needed to be closed while the site was cleared and redeveloped. Those allotments will be coming back onto the site. There will be a number of new network footpath connections made into Hackney and to Leighton, again to facilitate, we call them stitches. So the park, in fact, will go east and west of its present boundaries. And these won't just be a footpath link with a signpost. These will be real green corridor links. So the park will actually move out and reconnect with those communities. And of course the hope is that the communities will take on board the park as a local park, like Victoria Park is, which isn't too far from the site, and will become very much embedded in the community. I think, there's always a concern, that something as large as an Olympic Games event, international status, somehow alienates a local community, and then once all the fun and games have died away, literally, what is the community left with? And I think, again, more than any other games that I know of, this client and the team and the outreach teams and the communities very, very much want this park to be fully embedded back into those communities. So there's a full programme of events and educational opportunities. The North Park, which is a very ecologically based park, you will have seen in games mode there are very large terraces, timber terrace seating constructions. They are intended to form effectively small amphitheatres for entertainment purposes or education reasons for outdoor classrooms. Some of the lawn systems that we've designed of varying scales to cater for different size user groups. And there will be major through routes which will be lit right through the park. So again, from a security perspective, it's intended that the park is open for full park use. What's interesting, or is actually a surprise to many people when we say that as part of our work designing the games landscape, every stage of the design proposals we were required to go through planning. And people are saying, well, it's a temporary landscape. Well, in fact, as I said earlier, it isn't. It's a permanent landscape. And so the planning system was a very rigorous one. And before we took any aspect of the project, there were numerous planning applications just within landscape and public realm. And we had to go through the prescribed route that we all do with planning applications. But the client actually had a small team called the Planning Decisions Team that were, if you like, the first line of police between us as designers and the ultimate planning committee. And we frequently went before PDT, as it was known, to sell our ideas, and they were very rigorous with us in terms of the sustainability aspects of what we were doing, recycled materials, doing things once. The cost effect. Well, the cost doesn't actually come into a planning situation, but clearly it needed to be cost effective as well as part of the overall delivery. But that wasn't a particular planning requirement, obviously. But as part of that process, we went out to the communities and did a number of weekend events, evening events. I remember we worked on Eton Manor, which is at the very north end of the park, and the Eton Manor Boys Club, which is a very, very long-term embedded sports club in the area, was clearly struggling because most of its lands were being taken over for the Olympics. We worked incredibly closely with the club members, and they also wanted memorial gardens to be created to remember famous sportsmen and women who were part of the club, who had lost their lives during the two great wars. And we've created memorial gardens as part of the Eton Manor scheme. And then we worked also and spoke with the allotment holders to bring those groups back to the park. Detailed dialogue with the allotment holders about what ideally they would like as part of the specification for those new allotments. So there's been numerous meetings. As we all go through them as landscape architects, but I think in the heat of the 4-year process, that was a very fundamental part of our design methodology and approach. As a landscape architect, the designs that we have evolved and created are in themselves, I would hope that they are seen as some of the most beautiful and maturing working landscapes, as well as something one would just look at as a thing of beauty. But it's what's behind that design that's fundamental. I've mentioned on a number of occasions the S word, the sustainability word, the recycled materials. We have used on a scale never been used in the UK before, vegetable oils, recycled vegetable oils for binders for the surface materials. We've used recycled medical waste for drainage systems. We're using LED lighting in the park, driven by small turbines. We are using photovoltaic panels on the lighting. And these are all things that are not new, but to use them in this park on this scale, and still, despite some people say, well, some of these are a little incongruous, they're a little bit obvious, the photovoltaic panels are very large, how does that work in design terms? And I think it's understanding a whole new language of how design and energy conscious design integrates. And that comes right down to the type of plant selection, the soils we're using. We have gone out of our way not to use scarce resources. So the whole approach and the way that we have achieved these designs is fundamentally embedded in the thought for the future generations as we move through the 21st century. So that's probably the biggest achievement. Well, I think again that visually comes down to a large extent to the way in which we've used the plant material. I'm sure you've talked to Nigel and James about the use of meadow planting, so annual meadows and perennial meadows, and they will continue. The perennial meadows will be a fundamental part of the landscape overlay and the planting design going forwards. And a lot of that pioneering work has been done in the UK through James, particularly, and Nigel in Sheffield. And the use of that material, which is, yes, it's cost effective, it doesn't require high-tech or scarce resources in terms of soils. It actually isn't even a high-tech response, but what it is a very, very controlled and tightly specified response. And I think that's really important to understand. We all think, oh, meadows are wonderful and we'll just throw some seed down. It isn't as simple as that, and it really shouldn't be. So there's been some lessons learnt there. But done right, a meadow treatment as part of an overall landscape, I think is a very, very valuable. It goes right through from the visual aesthetic to the biodiversity again. We've made great strides in choosing meadow material that will benefit, obviously, the insectivorous world and the bees. If you walk through 2012 Gardens, it is full of bees, absolutely rammed with bees. And at one point there was going to be mooted of beehives and so on and so forth, but it's all part of that new language in what is landscape about. It isn't just to look at, it's actually integrated with us as humans, how we work with it and how it works with us. So there's that. There is the whole use of water or not. We're using grey water to irrigate the project in games. The intent is to remove all irrigation from the park in due course once the mature landscape is has embedded. The exception to that would be the landscape in 2012 gardens. Because of the nature of that material, which is more of an RHS response or a Q response, we accept that there is a need to maintain an irrigation aspect to that garden, but it will be using grey water, which again is good. And Thames Water, it's the first time they've ever allowed grey water to be utilised in a public parkland before. So that's a new aspect of how we would work with landscape design and the use of water resources in the future. So, you know, these are all really important principles that, as landscape architects, we should be grasping. Right at the outset, there was some criticism by some landscape architects who said, but you know, you're not using granites, you're not using, it doesn't have this Germanic quality feel that we've all been used to going over to the continent and seeing with the Buga festivals and the Floriadas and so on and so forth. And here we are using asphalt, but we're using porous asphalt, so it's a sustainable drainage system. We're using vegetable binders, but we're using them in a very simple but high quality way. We've used concrete, but we're using recycled materials in the concrete, so the aggregates aren't being taken from the ground, it's recycled material. And we're using concrete in a way that I think a lot of people would not expect to see it. Again, it's something which is done very well, mostly in the States, I might add. But the fine detailing that you can achieve with concrete is quite spectacular. But we had to take the UK construction industry with us on this one. I know some of the steps in the 2012 gardens, for instance. There were perhaps 15 or 16 attempts at getting the step construction correct. Specification was the same, but it was getting the understanding of the contractor to understand the level of response we wanted. So tight specification is very important. And again, it's something that we should embrace because it's a very effective way of designing very, very well, but not using scarce resources and not bringing granites in from China or India or where else. I think what we should all take from it is, if it can be done on a big scale, as it has been done, I believe, in the Olympic Park, it can be achieved on the small scale, and that is coordinated and integrated approach. I think landscape architects, and myself included, have had a very interesting time over our professional lives when we come to deal with utilities on projects. We all know that utilities can be a nightmare to us, whether that's because of where we want to put our trees or footpaths or whatever. And one could argue that, well, because this project has been so large, utilities companies have done their very best to help us achieve our goals. That is true in part, but I think, again, about lessons being learned, the utility companies, and indeed the consultant engineers, which is even more important, have grasped a very important lesson about working with landscape architects and what we are seeking to achieve. And we have had a very good response from the engineering consultancy world. Going forwards, they are telling us that they will take the lessons that they've learned from us as landscape architects forward into future programs and projects. And they won't be on the scale that Olympic Park is, of course. Because we've been able to show them in a very short space of time a very mature landscape. In other words, I think, again, even our fellow consultants and other professional areas have been overwhelmed by the landscape response. and what can be achieved. And they've seen by an agreement to divert services, or which is the obvious thing, what it's created, what it's allowed us to create as a response. So I think, so as teams going forwards into the future, it's small. It's not going to be a massive change overnight, and we have to keep working at it, obviously. But I genuinely think that because of the change in attitude, because of whether it be scarce resources or climate change, and therefore we respond with use of different materials, the team on the project have been very open to the changes, and I'd like to think that as a landscape architect, we were the glue, if you like, in the project, because the other professions largely were engaged with their own particular response, but we, as landscape architects, had to transcend all of that and work with all of those teams to deliver what on the surface is quite often the product that the scheme will stand or fall by. Now, one would say we couldn't afford London 2012 to go wrong. Obviously we couldn't. But I think everyone has really joined together to realise a project that can, the same lessons apply to a small project as it does to this. This is just many, many small projects, in all honesty. Well, it's given me immense satisfaction, and it's given me a rejuvenated spirit, if you like, to go forward now with our clients in the future, and actually fellow landscape architects. I mean, what it has done is allowed us to engage with colleagues and deliver something. Again, using quite different techniques quite often from the ones that people may have been taught through college days. Look at new ways of designing particular details. And it's given us a whole new palette. It's given us a new story. It's reinvigorated us, I think. I've got real belief in how we as a profession can and should be able to influence the development process when you have a showcase like London 2012. I mean, this is for all landscape architects, and it would have been wonderful to have had many, many more landscape architects working on the project. But I think for me, it's been absolute just breath of fresh air to the challenge initially of arguably not having the budgets to do certain things, the old school, then grasping fundamentally the issues that we needed to deal with, seeing into the future, and how we've addressed that. So whilst it hasn't changed my job as such, it's given me a new dynamic to help me go forward. We had a big team. The client's vision was one that we required such a big team. We initially felt that a lot of the specialist skills could have been delivered with a smaller team, and our natural response was actually if the project needs to be completed in 4.5 years, arguably the smaller the team, the easier that is to coordinate. It very, very quickly became apparent to us that the team that we had with their specialist skills, and you've mentioned James and Nigel and Sarah, and I could go on with our lighting consultants and our ecologists and our irrigation specialists. All of those brought something unique to the project. And whilst we were responsible for that team and coordinating that team, I'm sure that the collaborative response that allowed us to make to the project has undoubtedly given us a project at the end of the day that we would not have delivered in the time. I think it's chiefly time. You know, you couldn't afford to make mistakes. So you needed people that were at the very top of their game to deliver a product and an output that was not going to let anyone down, and actually would, you know, endure and go forwards. And the skills that landscape architects require today, I think, are wider and greater than ever before. And I think the role of there is role for the generalist landscape architect, and I think that's a very useful one to have in one's armoury. But I think the specialist is a very important component of that. So I think that team that we responded to the client brief with is a real lesson in going forwards in the future with projects. And I think more collaboration, and I mean that in terms of working with the engineering consultancies too, the landscape engineers. And I think that was a real plus. That's not to say that landscape architects can't do hard detailing, but I think it was a very important part of the process. And I think everybody at the end of the day has recognised that the product is a product of that process. There's no room for egos in this project, and that's important as well. I think in the next 5 years, it's well, first of all, that the transformation phase goes to plan. I know there'll be a clamour to reopen the park before 2013. That's not in our gift. That's something the client will deal with. But I also know that the demount of the games venues will take a period of time, and that's not weeks, it is months. And only then will the communities be able to repopulate the park and come back in and reclaim it actually as their park, because it's been an international stage will be for the last fortnight and the next Paralympic period. So it's going to be a year before the communities properly re-engage, and I think that's going to be an interesting time, a very interesting time. And I'm you know, it'd be very good, I think, if a way can be found to allow people onto the park in certain places and parts. Clearly it's going to be a construction site, so there's health and safety issues that one needs to consider. But to shut out the community totally, I think now, given the success that we're seeing and the response that the public are giving to the park, is something that has to be addressed. Beyond that, so from 2014 onwards, my wish is that the park truly becomes, you know, a number of things. You know, fully embraced by the communities. There's pride in it. It becomes fully programmed. It becomes known as a safe place to bring your children and to play sport, or just simply walk and sit in the grass. Look at nature. You know, if things are already showing positive signs of returning to the park. You know, the grey heron, the kingfisher, eels are coming back. We're very hopeful that otters will re-enter the park very soon. We've built otter hults into the design. We have swift hotels, kingfisher walls, and the whole point of that is to bring these species back, and that will bring people in to look at those species. So that's the immediate hope, that we will have a park that is embraced by the community. Beyond that, you know, whether we're talking 50 years, 100 years, so you then start to look at it in terms of the Victorian era parks that we have today, like Victoria Park, that's just been re-envisioned and redeveloped and restored in many areas, or the bigger parks of central London. You know, this, I would like to think that the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, which is what it will be known as, will have a real special place as one of the great London parks. It's certainly big enough. It has the status to become that. And if the legacy delivery produces the response that is set out and is hoped, and that could take 20, 30 years to properly deliver the legacy. All the more reason why the park is such a fundamental catalyst in that process. But I do believe, as London, as a world city, becomes ever more important, it would seem, from a world perspective, that this part of East London, as we know it today, will simply become part of London. And the key to that is to ensure that the park operates on a number of levels, both at a local level and as an international green space. I've probably covered quite a number of those aspects, but I mentioned this word glue, and I don't mean that flippantly, because I think as a profession, it's quite clear, and I'll take an example actually, which is a real example on the park. We've worked very closely with a number of the venue architects on the park, and one in particular, Hopkins Architects, who are the designers of the most beautiful architecture, in my opinion, of the Velodrome. It's a fantastic venue. We were not, and that was the setup of the project. We were not fully integrated with all of the architect teams. We had review process with them at particular stages. So I remember, and I can smile now, but I remember a period when Hopkins for the first time saw our North Park landscape emerging. And they became quite exercised about the scale of the landscape and how it may be detrimental to their building, to their venue, and i.e. you couldn't see it because it would be screened by these great large landforms. And we had to hold fast because we look, you must trust us. We do know, we understand scale of the park that we're dealing with. We understand setting and context. And we understand how the park needs to have the architecture associated with it. People talk about a world-class park. Well, actually, it's more to do with world-class architecture and how that sits in the landscape. A world-class landscape can only respond, I think, to what it's part of. So, as I said, we had this interesting situation when it became quite apparent that there was an objection going to be lodged against the scale of the landform. And because of the time scales that we were under, the client did a masterly job of kind of just keeping us at a sort of arm's length, and we were delivering, and had the trust and the belief in us that it would be fine. And of course you prepare montages and you prepare views, and it was quite funny when there was questioning of these. Well, are you sure they're right? Well, yes, absolutely they are. Back to my point about understanding scale. Anyway, long story, to the chase. When the velodrome was complete and our landscape was largely complete and planted in 2011, a number of photographs began to be taken of the finished venues. And I have to say that the one that Hopkins always use in their publicity material is the one of the velodrome sat in the context of the landform of North Park. And it sells the venue, it sells the architecture. And that's really important going forward into legacy, because this is always something that landscape architecture has struggled with. How do you put an economic value on landscape? And how is it measured in development terms? Well, I think this project sets the benchmark and the context for future development coming onto the park. People will want to come and live and work in association with these parklands. I'm absolutely sure of it. And the developers, no doubt, will set a premium for that, and the park is the catalyst for that. So, yes, I think that's the... Yeah. As I said, the interesting thing was that we found a way with the client to still be involved in the delivery of the hard landscape. And I do think that's very important. You can imagine, can't you, if you are identifying the look and feel of something, and you take it to a point, then not to be able to see it on the ground in the way that it is either in your head or even on the initial drawings is very frustrating. So, and that was part of the contractual setup. But we found a way through that. And I think the hard landscape is very robust, it's very well executed. You know, I keep back to the simplicity again, you know, there's nothing precious about it. But that's fine. It's a big park and it's a big scale, you know. And we learnt, you know, the other thing, actually, I hadn't said, it is important, and we learnt a great deal from our colleagues at Hargreaves. You know, the American landscape architects work in a very different way to Europeans. And equally, George and Gavin and Mary Margaret, the three key drivers behind their practice, they learnt a huge amount about working in the UK and how we deliver the process here. It is different to how it's delivered in the States, without a doubt. So that's been a very useful exercise.